Now it's time to turn things over to President and CEO Graham Henderson.
Thank you. So Jeffrey, just in contrast to 2015, I joined Universal in November of 1999. So I don't think I'm a talisman. And in fact, you're probably having to, feeling some weight pushing back down the hill. It's me. Anyway, for those of you who were here last year, you will remember that we announced Music Canada's commitment to taking concrete action to promote diversity and inclusivity. In announcing the initiative, Amy noted that we would be working with experts in governance and organizational excellence to examine Music Canada in an effort to find ways that we could be more inclusive. This governance review was exhaustive and time-consuming, and it featured it was a top-to-bottom process. As I remarked at our global forum on inclusivity, change requires acting with urgency and intentionality, and we did that. It would have been very easy for us to say that Music Canada was boxed in terms of gender representation, because the presidents of our organizations, of our member organizations, they are the board, and they're men. We could have dodged the issue by pointing at our bylaws, which many organizations do, but we didn't. Bylaws can be changed, and alternatives can be found, and we did both. The answer to our situation was to implement a diversity policy and to change our bylaws, allowing us to expand the board by adding 2 independent directors. And I'm pleased to inform you that we're in the final stages of recruiting these 2 directors, and pursuant to our diversity policy, they will both be women. We hope to confirm them at our next board meeting in November. The candidates to whom we have narrowed the search down to will bring to the board outstanding expertise in corporate governance, finance and accountability, and general business acumen. Our gender balance within a year will have gone from 0 to 40% women. And I want to commend our members, Shane Carter, Steve Kane, Jeffrey Remedios, and their teams for their commitment to this change to inclusivity and diversity. I also want to thank our outside advisors who are not here today, Rob DeRoy and Deborah Brown of Governance Solutions, for their incredible guidance and advice. Internally, our effort was coordinated and overseen by our own amazing Amy Terrell, but it was a team effort. And I want to thank Richard, Jackie, Jennifer, and Patrick for their thoughtful input and support. It was hundreds of hours. And I also want to conclude on this note. Making boards more gender inclusive can seem daunting, and often targets are set in the distant future. Yet fully qualified women are available now. Impediments to change often lurk just below the surface. And here's one example for you to think about. Many boards have no term limits, meaning people can serve forever. And the lack of term limits entrenches the status quo. And the status quo is white and male. Changing bylaws to impose term limits can be an important step. So can actually sitting down with those who represent the status quo and asking them if they may not consider stepping aside to make room for fresh faces, new voices, new ideas. At the Ontario Chamber of Commerce, the board, which I chaired at the time, went from 17 men and 6 women to 13 women and 10 men in 3 years. It's the first commercial organization of its kind in the country to do that, in history. To get there, we had to be very blunt about what we were doing. And we said no to a lot of very qualified men. But we said yes to many equally qualified women. And let me tell you this bluntly. The quality of conversation and decision-making at that board has improved exponentially. And we expect the same results here at Music Canada. So, so now let me introduce our keynote speaker. Almost 15 years ago, when we were all desperately trying to figure out what was happening to our industry, now I realize it was me, I found myself sitting at a hotel lobby at Medem with Ted Cohen, who may be known to some of you. Pundits had been predicting the complete demise of the recording industry for years. It was a very grim time. And Ted was then the SVP for Digital Development and Distribution at EMI, and he'd been on the digital cutting edge forever. And as we sort of chatted about what was happening and we were glum and gloomy, Ted suddenly said, well, I really think Deborah Sparr's book, Ruling the Waves, should be required reading for everyone. She's got it all figured out. And I'm like, Deborah, who? Somebody has this figured out? So I rushed out to get the book, and it absolutely revolutionized the way I approached my own efforts to help rebuild our shattered industry. I even made a pilgrimage down to Harvard, you might remember that, to visit you, and then I invited you, and you became one of the first keynotes at our very first global forums. That was in 2008. Now, Deborah's gift is, in my view, you're not a historian per se, but you have the gift of historians, good historians, which is to recognize patterns. And she helped me to understand that what was happening was not necessarily unique. I was suddenly able to see the digital revolution in the context of other technological upheavals of the past. Most importantly, writing in 2001, Deborah saw in the patterns of the past our future. And it was not the future that techno-utopians were necessarily predicting. It was a future in which rulemaking would eventually return. In other words, Deborah helped me to see that we had a chance. And for me, this was immensely calming. And it gave me not only hope, but a framework within which I could work. So I want to personally thank you, Deborah, for providing me and many others. You heard from Kerry the extent to which he's recommended your book to people, but with the information to keep fighting. The book you wrote in 2001 helped shape today in many ways that you might not be aware, so I think another study is due. In Ruling the Waves, Deborah said that many technological innovations, Deborah said that as a technological innovation, the internet was like many before: the compass, the printing press, telegraph, radio. They all promised to transform the world's politics and business in unprecedented way, creating waves of commerce and chaos. The claims made for each new technology seemed almost identical. And I remember one passage in particular in which you reproduced claims made by advocates, I think it was for the telegraph. And if you swapped out telegraph and put in internet, it was almost a perfect match. In each case, the proponents of the new technologies argued that they should be free of all restraints, including taxes, I suppose, and rules. And in each case, golden ages were promised in which everyone would benefit. The idea that disruption would have its casualties was dismissed. But to quote Deborah, eventually and inevitably, even cowboys long for rules. Rules of property, rules of coordination, rules of competition. The erstwhile pioneers thus turned to government, lobbying for order and setting the stage for the next wave of discovery. Governments around the world are now recognizing that the wealth being generated from creative content online is not being returned to the people and businesses who create it. And the European Parliament has identified value gap as the problem and is urgently updating their laws.